Hej, jeg hedder Jesper Jeppesen, og jeg er her på Skywalk, hvor jeg leder. Vi er her nu til debatten Findes Gud, og mennesker strømmer ind, og stemningen er bare ved at stige, så vi glæder os rigtig meget til at komme i gang. Her ved min side har vi vores aftens ordstyrer, Adam Holm.
Ja, som Jesper lige har sagt, jeg hedder Adam Holm, jeg er til daglig ansat på DR2, og jeg er vældig glad for at være inviteret, fordi ikke alene er jeg ikke fra de her kanter normalt, men jeg er også erklæret atheist, og ikke desto mindre har Skywalk altså valgt at invitere sådan en som mig ind, og det er jeg glad for, at jeg skal nok få at optræde så nogenlunde værdineutralt man kan til den her debat under det spændende, eviggyldige tema, Does God Exist? De to debattører er Danish Nørmark, som er tidligere medstifter af Humanistisk Samfund og erklæret ikke-troende /atheist, og den anden er den kendte amerikanske evangelist, forfatter, Dr. Frank Turek. Så det bliver det, man i boksningens verden kalder a rumble in the jungle.
Antæt byrder, fremragende. God aften, mine damer og herrer, og rigtig gerne velkommen til Skywalk her på Law of Thermodynamics. Der er alle sådan alle steder side. Der er en halv joke. Godt, som sagt, der er ikke så mange pladser tilbage, men som sagt, der er mulighed for at sidde ude på siderne, og ellers så må I bare lige klemme jer lidt sammen, så vi alle sammen kan være her. Til jer, der ikke kender mig, så hedder jeg Jesper Jeppesen, og jeg er ungdomspræst og leder i Skywalk, og det er mig en kæmpe stor ære at være jeres vært her i aften til en fantastisk debat, vi har foran os. Og jeg vil bare lige sætte hurtigt tingene i gang, inden det er, at jeg giver ordet over til Adam. Skywalk er en ungdomskirke med omkring 200 unge personer, som er en del af det, og du kan egentlig læse mere omkring os på den flyer, som der er på din stol, og du skal være hjertelig velkommen til at snakke med de personer, som har et skilt på. De vil elske at snakke med dig, og de er her bare for at tjene dig her i dag, og er her for at gøre din aften så god som overhovedet muligt. Og som jeg lige sagde, så på jeres stol, så kan I alle sammen se, der er en flyer. Kan I se den? Kan I vifte med den? Fremragende. Fantastisk. Vi vil sætte rigtig stor pris på, hvis du i slutningen af debatten vil udfylde den og lægge den i kassen, som er nede bagved, så værtsfolkene vil stå med dernede, så det er sådan, at vi kan både blive bedre til, hvordan vi skal gøre det i fremtiden, og hvis du ønsker at vide mere om Skywalk eller har nogle kommentarer med mere. Så vi vil virkelig sætte pris på, hvis jeg har lyst til det, for det vil virkelig bare hjælpe os. Så tusind tak for det. Og jeg vil også gerne minde omkring, der nok ikke rigtig bliver mulighed for publikum til at stille spørgsmål til vores to debattører i aften. Det skal Adam nok sørge for, at der bliver stillet de rigtig gode spørgsmål. Men i morgen så har Frank faktisk sagt, at han er til rådighed fra 5 til 7 på Kongens Ege, hvis nogen er interesseret i det. Og jeg vil også gerne bede jer alle sammen om lige at tage jeres mobiltelefon frem. Hold den oppe. Og så står den på lydløs. Fordi det var lidt træls, hvis det er sådan, at folk begynder at snakke med alle mulige andre, og det er bare træls for os, der står her på scenen. Og det gælder også Adam. Godt. Ej, pjat. Godt. Jeg vil også gerne bare lige sige, at hvis jeg har brug for oversættelse, så vil der være oversættelse nede bagved. Og det vil simpelthen være en oversættelsesstreaming. Det betyder simpelthen, at der vil være en lille forsinkelse på. Så kun tag det som nogen, hvis det er sådan, at du gerne vil have det. Du kan gå ind og finde linket på skywalk.dk, hvor du simpelthen kan finde det her streaming-link. Godt, og jeg vil nu skifte over til engelsk, så det er sådan, at vores to amerikanske venner også forstår sig. And I want to introduce our moderator for tonight, who is Adam Holm. Adam, he's from Copenhagen. He also actually got a PhD in modern history. He has worked on the Danish newspaper Politiken, as a lot of you guys probably know. And there he worked as a debate editor. And right now he has also contributed and attributed to a lot of books here, including With Other Eyes, which is in Danish med andre øjne. And well, it just sounds better than English also, so it's translated into English. It's good, it's pretty good. Read that. Yeah. Good. He's also, you probably know him from the show on DR. How you translate that one, I didn't know. Well, thank you. Deadline, where he's also a co-host on. And I want you all to give a huge applause for Adam Holm.
Really, thank you very much. You're much too kind. Thank you, all my family members. Thank you very much, and good evening to all of you. I'm really glad to be here. It's one of the debates I've been looking most forward to all my life. I didn't know it was going to take place in Randers, but it did, and it does, and I'm really thrilled to be here because we have two brilliant debaters, and we have a lively, exuberant audience. So we're in for 2 really good hours, and as you know, Dr. Frank Turek. I'll come to the introduction in a minute. But we have a devout Christian, and we have someone who's less devout, so to speak, actually a non-theist. So that's the debate. And just before we really get started, I just want to find out if this whole crew in here, who you correspond with. How many of you in here are Christians? Oh, that's an overwhelming majority in support of God and Jesus. How many of you in here would describe yourself as atheists or agnostics? Hello. Hello, my friends. I'm counting 5. How many of you would consider yourself good old-fashioned confused? Any Muslims? Any Taoists? Any Buddhists? Any sexists? Oh, well, any Jews? Okay, I'm half a Jew, so I'll be the Jewish part of the whole setup here. But never mind that. I think the Christian population, so to speak, is overwhelmingly in majority here. So, Dr. Turek, you have your supporters solidly placed. But let's see at the end of the day, after 2 hours of heavy debate, who knows, there might be 1 or 2 people who are confused, who start doubting. But we'll come to that. But let's just jump straight to things. Let me introduce our 2 brilliant presenters. On my right, we have Dr. Frank Turek, who just likes to be addressed as Frank. And Frank is the founder and president of an organization called Cross-Examined. It's an organization dedicated to presenting the Christian worldview at high schools and universities. Frank has authored and co-authored books on religious matter, and he hosts a popular weekly television program called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Well, actually, I'm calling it popular. Frank says nobody watches it except his mother. Right. But that's one Christian watching it anyway. Your mom is an atheist. Right, okay. And if you haven't seen the debate on YouTube, and there's a lot of young people in here who would know what YouTube is. My parents don't know what it is, by the way. But some of you will be familiar with the debate between Frank and the late British atheist Christopher Hitchens. Check it out. It's from 2008. It's quite lively, but it will be, the one tonight will be more lively, I'm sure. Not least because Danish is actually alive, unlike Mr. Hitchens. And Frank holds a master, that's the academic part of Frank. He holds a master's from George Washington University and a doctorate in apologetics from Southern Evangelical Seminary. Frank, isn't that pretty much it, the bio thing?
You forgot about my wife and kids, but that's okay.
Well, I don't know them.
Well, they're not on there?
But he's happily married and he has...
Yes. Oh, there I am.
A lot of children. So that's Frank. And Frank will start in just a few minutes. Let me just introduce on my left, Danish Nørmark. I'm sure many of you will know him. He's an anthropologist by profession, and like Frank, also author of several books. Dennis is chief consultant and head of faculty at Living Institute, which is an organization that works for enhancing cross-cultural understanding. And Dennis has for a number of years been a regular contributor to Jyllands-Posten, Denmark's biggest daily, as you know, and he has frequently appeared on national TV and radio, and he's also a founding member of the Humanist Society.
Yeah.
That's what it
That's
translates
what we would
into
translate
English.
it to,
Right.
yeah.
And he's a declared political liberal. So, and he's from Aarhus, by the way, and lives in Copenhagen. So he's a bit of an enemy to you, unlike the American. But never mind. I don't know who's actually, whose home court it is, but we'll find out. Just before we get started, one basic rule about the whole thing. Keep it lively. Keep it smiley. You may clap your hands. You may applaud the 2 debaters. You may cheer them on, but be civilized, please. This debate has to be conducted within the limits of good social behavior, and I'm sure you're all up to your best. But apart from that, we have 2 hours of energetic debate. And the rule of the game is this. Frank will start. He has 20-25 minutes. Dennis will have 20-25 minutes, and I should make a note of this. It's pre-prepared, so Dennis is not actually at first responding to Frank. After that, they have 10 minutes each of exchanging, and then they settle down here, and we have a dialogue. A heated, lively, somewhat bitterly disputed dialogue. Yeah, and I'm afraid we cannot bring in questions from the crowd, but I hope I'll do the job. Otherwise, kick me in my butt afterwards. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give our 2 debaters a hand. Frank.
Good evening, Denmark. Good evening, Denmark. As our esteemed host, Adam, said, I am Frank Turek. How many of you have heard me before, or this is your first time?
YouTube.
How many of you are here tonight? Hold on. We have to, we have some technical, talk awkwardly amongst yourselves. Hang on a second here. Aha, there we are. Is that good? There we go. Well, I just want to say that my colleague Ted Wright and I have been here at the invitation of Jesper and Skywalk for the past 4 days, and you have an absolutely beautiful country. Is the weather always this good? I mean, I came from North Carolina. I was expecting that we were going to be bundled up. I was going to bring my ski jacket, but this has been amazing. Now, these two gentlemen have come a long way to debate me. I came a little bit further, but all the way from Copenhagen. It's a great pleasure to be here and an honor to be on the stage with these two fine gentlemen. But despite the fact there appear to be more Christians in the audience than atheists, I am at an away game right now. So I just want to make sure everything is refereed fairly. Adam, please, keep it fair. Keep it fair. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you. Now, before I get into this, when you come to a debate, you're getting the overview of the overview. There's no way that I can make a complete case for my position, and there's no way Dennis can make a complete case for his position. So we both have books. I highly encourage you to get them if you're serious about really investigating this issue. I have a book out there on the book table. There's a DVD set out there that goes over the material in 7 hours. So I have 20 minutes here, so you can see I'm not going to be able to do a real complete job. But if you want to go deeper, there's also, you can get the book of the DVDs. There's also our website, crossexamine.org. There's a lot of videos up there. And by the way, I want to point out that all the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine. Okay? Just so you know. I got 3 sons, so I need some help. All right? All right, I guess we can start the clock now. Is that okay, Adam? All right, I'm going to try and give evidence for God, and this is all in our book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. The first piece of evidence is the beginning of the universe that I think points to God. The second is the fine-tuning of the universe. The third is the existence of objective moral values, and the fourth is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So let's start here at the beginning of the universe, and this is what some people say is the Big Now, I know some Christians in here are going, Frank, we don't believe in the Big Bang. Look, I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good, you even have atheists admitting the data. Stephen Hawking says almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. He tries to come up with another explanation for how the universe came into existence. I think he fails, but he's admitting that the universe, space, matter, and time had a beginning. Another colleague of his, a cosmologist, somebody who studies the origin of the universe, Alexander Vilenkin, said, with the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, what is having these scientists admitting space, time, and matter had a beginning? This is all from chapter 3 of our book. I can only go over it very quickly, but the evidence from science is in an acronym, SURGE, S-U-R-G-E. S stands for the second law of thermodynamics, which says the universe is running out of usable energy. As time goes on, the amount of energy in the universe is running down. One day that sun is going to burn out. Well, how does this show the universe had a beginning? Because if the universe was eternal, that sun would have burned out a long time ago. We'd have no energy left, but we still have energy. Therefore, the universe had a beginning. The U stands for the fact that the universe is expanding. Edwin Hubble discovered this in 1929 when he saw all the galaxies moving away from us. Well, if you reverse that and go all the way back to the beginning, you come back to a point where time, space, and matter go to zero. So once there was nothing and the entire space-time continuum leapt into existence. And scientists thought it leapt into existence with a great explosion. And they didn't bother looking for the heat from the great explosion until 1965 when 2 scientists discovered it by accident. And it's called the radiation afterglow. That's the remnant heat from the initial Big Bang explosion. You know, when you cook something in your oven and you're done cooking, you open the oven and there's some remnant heat in there. Well, there's still remnant heat coming off the universe. It's just a couple of degrees above absolute zero, but these gentlemen discovered it. They won Nobel prizes for it in 1978. This is literally the smoking gun to the Big Bang. The G stands for the great galaxy seeds. Those are very fine temperature variations in the radiation afterglow that allowed the galaxies to form in the early universe. And the E stands for Einstein's theory of general relativity. Einstein knew in 1915 or 16 that space, time, and matter were correlative, that they came into existence together, that at some point, space, time, and matter had a beginning. Now, it wasn't just Einstein that knew this. Many other scientists who have won Nobel Prizes in physics have said this. These are all Nobel Prize winners who helped discover some of this surge evidence. The first is Arno Penzias. Here's what he said. And by the way, these are not Christians. Penzias said, the best data we have concerning the Big Bang are exactly what I would have predicted had I had nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. His colleague, Robert Wilson, said, certainly there was something that set it all off. I can't think of a better theory of the origin of the universe to match Genesis. George Smoot, a astrophysicist at University of California at Berkeley, said, there is no doubt that a parallel exists between the Big Bang as an event and the Christian notion of creation from nothing. So, if the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. The evidence leaves us with one of the following 2 options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, my only question is, which view is more reasonable? That no one created something out of nothing, or that someone created something out of nothing? I think someone created something out of nothing. That makes more sense. And so did this man, who actually is an agnostic, or was an agnostic before he died about 6 years ago. His name is Robert Jastrow. He wrote a book called God and the Astronomers. On page 1 of the book, he says, I'm an agnostic on religious matters. In other words, he goes, look, I don't know whether God exists or not. But then he goes through some of this surge evidence, and here is the last line of his book. He says, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. No doubt reading Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That seems to be the best explanation so far. That is the beginning of the universe. The second piece of evidence is the fine-tuning of the universe. Not only did the universe explode into being out of nothing, it did so with extreme precision, as if somebody were shepherding the expansion and the creation and the expansion through stages. In fact, Stephen Hawking, again an atheist, put it this way. He said, if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million, a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. You change the expansion rate that infinitesimal amount, we're not here. Not only are we not here, there might not even be a universe at all. There might not even be chemistry. So the expansion rate is precisely fine-tuned. This is an initial condition. Somebody just put this condition in at the very beginning. The gravitational force is also highly fine-tuned. It's fine-tuned to 1 in 10 to the 40 precision. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around 1 to the 10 to the 40. Neither can I, so let me give you an illustration. 1 to 10 to the 40 precision is this. Imagine a tape measure stretched across the entire known universe. Now, that's a long way. Set the gravitational force at a particular inch mark on that tape measure. I know gravity's not measured in inches, but this is just to give you a scale idea in your mind. If you were to move the strength of gravity 1 inch in either direction, we wouldn't be here. That's 1 in 10 to the 40 precision. There's only 3 possible explanations for that value being where it is. Physical necessity, it had to be there. No, it didn't have to be there. Could have been here, could have been here, could have been 1,000,000 miles that way. Chance. Somehow it just happened by chance. I don't have enough faith to believe that. In fact, chance is not a cause. Chance is a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. There's not a force out there known as chance. When we use the word chance, we're saying we just don't know. The third possibility, of course, is design. Somebody put it right there. That seems to be the best explanation to me. Arno Penzias, again, not a Christian, put it this way. He said, astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing, one with the very delicate balance needed to provide exactly the right conditions required to permit life, and one which has an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan. Now, the third argument is not scientific at all. The third argument is more philosophical, yet it's the argument or the evidence that we've all known since we were very small children. About 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to visit the Buchenwald concentration camp right down here in Wiedmar, Germany. For those of you that have been to concentration camps, you know how sobering that can be. Well, in April of 1945, the Allies liberated the camp. They went through the front gate, which is still there. They looked off to the right. They saw the crematorium, which is still there. They got down to the crematorium, and they looked into the courtyard attached to the crematorium, and this is what they saw. Brace yourself. If there is no God, then this is just a matter of opinion. Why? Because if there is no standard beyond humanity, then that's just your opinion against Hitler's opinion. If there's nobody out there who is unchanging and has the authority to establish what is good by his very nature, then everything's up for grabs. It's just your opinion against Hitler's opinion. In fact, if there is no God, then the Nazis were not really wrong. They may have been unfashionable. They may have been people that we didn't like by what they did, but it's not objectively wrong because there's nothing objectively right. If there is no God, love is no better than rape. Not in an objective way. We, of course, might not like it, but it couldn't be objectively wrong unless there's a standard of objective rightness. If there is no God, there are no human rights. Everybody in this room believes you have certain rights. The right to life, the right to free association, the right to religion, the right to liberty, all of these things. If there is no God, there are no human rights. Everything is a matter of opinion. If there is no God, religious crusades are not wrong. Adam had mentioned my debates with Christopher Hitchens, a very witty guy. And he wrote a book called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. And he kept talking about how religious crusades, the people who did religious crusades were evil. And I agreed with him. But I kept asking him, they're evil by what standard? By your standard? You're an atheist. You don't have a standard to appeal to. I'm not saying he didn't know morality. I'm not saying he couldn't be a good guy. He could. I'm simply saying there's no way to justify it on atheism. If there is no God, tolerance is no better than intolerance. And if there is no God, you can't complain about the problem of evil. A lot of times people say, well, evil disproves God. In fact, C.S. Lewis thought so for a long time. He didn't believe in God because he thought there was too much injustice in the world. And then one day the light bulb went off in his mind. And he later wrote it in a book called Mere Christianity. Here's what he said. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, there's no such thing as injustice unless there's justice. In fact, you could put it this way. The shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you have to have sunshine. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil, but you can't have evil without good. You can't have shadows without sunshine. So evil does not disprove God. Evil is actually a backhanded argument for God because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was something known as good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed because God's nature is the standard of good. So evil may prove there's a devil out there, but it doesn't disprove God. Now, from these three arguments, I think we can draw some conclusions about God. First, from the beginning of the universe, we know he's immaterial, timeless, and spaceless. Why? Because he created material time and space, so he can't be made of material time and space. He transcends it. We also know he's extremely powerful because he created out of nothing. We create out of pre-existing material. God creates out of nothing. No space, no matter, no time. What is nothing? Aristotle had a good definition of nothing. He said, nothing is what rocks dream about. That's nothing. The fine-tuning of the universe tells us that this being is extremely intelligent. He put this universe together with extreme precision. He also has purpose. We're here for a reason. And from the moral argument, we also know this being is absolutely morally perfect, and he's also personal. Why? Because you only have a moral obligation to personal forces. You don't have a moral obligation to impersonal forces. If you go try and dunk a basketball over here, you're not sinning against the law of gravity. You only sin against persons. We also know this being is personal from the cosmological argument because only a personal force can make a choice. And in order to create the universe, a choice had to be made. See, gravity doesn't make a choice. Gravity doesn't go, look, if Turek drops that remote one more time, I'm not going to pull it to the ground, right? Gravity just does the same thing over and over again. But the creator of the universe had to make a choice. So we have an immaterial, timeless, spaceless, extremely powerful, extremely intelligent, purposeful, morally perfect, personal creator. This is the God of biblical Christianity identified without reference to the Bible. We haven't opened the Bible yet, but we have a being consistent with the Bible. Now, does this mean Christianity is true? No, not yet. Of course not. We don't even know who Jesus was at this point. I'm simply saying without opening the Bible, you can get the attributes of a theistic God who is consistent with the Bible. So my fourth line of evidence is the resurrection of Christ. The resurrection of Christ, and this, of course, is evidence directly for the Christian God. Now, there's a lot of evidence here that I can just skim over, but let me point out when it comes to the resurrection, we have early testimony. Most, if not all, the New Testament documents are written prior to 70 AD. A couple of reasons we know this is because the temple and the city of Jerusalem were destroyed in 70 AD, and not one New Testament document mentions it. They would not have left that out. It's too big of a deal. And in fact, even several books in the New Testament are written as if the temple and the city of Jerusalem are still standing when they're writing. And there's data in the documents that go all the way back to the event itself, particularly in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. There's an ancient creed which names all the witnesses of the resurrection. And this creed dates to pre-40 AD. Even atheist scholars admit this. We have very early testimony. Secondly, we have eyewitness testimony. They claim to be eyewitnesses, but they also prove to be eyewitnesses. There are 84 eyewitness details in the book of Acts alone, just from chapter 13 to the end of the book. They're all in chapter 10 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. There are 59 such details in the Gospel of John, historically probable or historically confirmed eyewitness details. There are several archaeological discoveries that we've discovered. In fact, we've actually found the tomb, the burial box of Caiaphas, the high priest who sentenced Jesus to die. They discovered this in Jerusalem in 1990. Inside the bones of this burial box were the bones of a 60-year-old man and his family. We not only know Caiaphas existed, we have his bones. There's also embarrassing testimony. What's embarrassing testimony? Well, let me ask you guys a question. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? Can I see your hands, please? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good. And we know you're lying, so it's not working. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? Yeah, you don't tend to do that. Why? Because it's embarrassing. You don't want embarrassing details to come out about you, and you're certainly not going to invent them. Turns out the New Testament and the Old Testament are filled with embarrassing details that the writers never would have made up if they were making up a story. Let me just give you a couple of these. Notice that Jesus calls their leader, Peter, Satan. Do you think they made that up? Do you think Mark, who wrote that down, said, hey, Pete, I'm gonna make this a really interesting story. I'm gonna have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. Why is he calling me Satan? Also, notice the disciples run away. This is like a Monty Python movie, isn't it? Run away! And who are the brave ones? Who are the brave ones, ladies? The ladies are the brave ones at the crucifixion. They didn't run away like the sissy pants men. Now, who wrote this down? Men. Now, what man is going to say that he was hiding for fear of the Jews while the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here make that up? I know if I was making it up, I'd write something down there like let's see, we marched right down there and overpowered that elite Roman guard. Yeah, that sounds good. And then we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say I was Mr. Sissy Pants. And by the way, all 4 Gospels say the women were the first witnesses. They wouldn't have done that in that culture. Why? Because a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So if you're making up the New Testament story, you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. I actually had a lady come up to me once. She said, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, you know, that is an excellent point. I hadn't thought of that. Also, do you notice that in the bloodline of Jesus, there are 2 prostitutes, Tamar and Rahab? Do you think they made that up? You think Mark and Luke got together and said, you know what? We need to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let's put a couple of prostitutes in there. No. You don't find this kind of embarrassing stuff from other histories. Any pharaoh that had embarrassing stuff written about him would chop the heads off of his historians. See, but the New Testament and the Old Testament are filled with all this embarrassing stuff. Also, there's excruciating testimony. 11 out of the 12 died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by saying he had never risen from the dead. What motive did these Jews, who already thought they were God's chosen people, what motive did they have to make up a new religion? Why would they do this? What did they get? They got excommunicated from the synagogue, then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks. Right? Why would you do that? You wouldn't do that. Also, extra biblical testimony. People always ask, are there any writings outside the New Testament that talk about the events of the first century? Yes, there are. There are 10 ancient non-Christian sources within 150 years of Jesus' life. People like Josephus, Tacitus, Suetonius, Thallus, Phlegon, people you've probably read earlier in your devotionals if you're a Christian. And when you take what they've written down, they've written very briefly about Jesus and the apostles, but when you combine everything they say, you get a story congruent with the New Testament. Now notice, these people don't say they believe Jesus rose from the dead, but they say his disciples believed he rose from the dead, and they were willing to die for their belief. So you have these non-Christian writers saying exactly what the New Testament says. Also, finally, the explosive growth of Christianity from the very city of Jerusalem, from which Jesus is alleged to have risen from the dead. How can you explain this if Jesus had never risen from the dead? Why would these Jews suddenly put everything they've ever believed on hold and pursue this new religion when all it got them was heartache temporally? They got excommunicated, easy for me to say, excommunicated from the synagogue and beaten, tortured, and killed. And then this new movement just burst out of Jerusalem, and it was persecuted on and off for over 280 years until Constantine made it tolerable by the Edict of Milan in 313 AD. There's no other way to explain how this occurred. Christianity did not spread by the sword. It spread by the sword being used on it. The best explanation seems to me that Jesus rose from the dead. So these are the 4 lines of evidence: the beginning of the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe, the existence of objective moral values, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Thank you.
Okay, Frank, thank you very much. You know what? You do actually convince me. You are a Christian. I thought you were a doubter, but you are a Christian. Thank you very much for a forceful and energetic and very clear presentation. Now, Dennis has some 20 minutes to present his case. And like I said in the beginning, at this moment, Dennis is not responding to Frank's presentation. It's Dennis on his own now. 20 minutes.
All right. Let's see if we've got an image. We've certainly got sound. Yeah, but no image. Should I do something here? Just mess with it? Care for it a little bit? Cuddle it? We'll see.
Oh, no, so many Christians in here, you should help him. Give him love.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Does God exist? The major question of today. Well, first of all, I was asked to answer this question. I don't hope I will disappoint you now. Does God exist? I don't know. I don't really know, because I am not a believer. I am a scientist. And as a scientist, I would say probably not. And I have to do that because I do not deal with certainty, exactly because I'm not a religious person. There's nothing I know for certain. Well, there are a few things I know for certain. I'll get back to that. But a lot of things I don't know for certain. This is my boy. He always got a bit of food in his face when I take a picture of him. He believes there is a monster under his bed. He's pretty sure of that, and I try to convince him that there is no monster under his bed. I don't think it's very likely that there is a monster under his bed. And it's the same thing with God, basically, that, I don't install a video camera in this boy's room just to make sure it is, because I'm pretty sure that it's very unlikely. And I have the same feeling with God, that it's a thing that might be out there, but right now I don't see a lot of proof for the existence of it. I will get back to Frank's so-called evidence a little bit later. This is 4 garden gnomes. They exist in a shed north of Aarhus. If you don't sing to those 4 gnomes, the world will stop spinning. You need to go out there and start singing for them every day, because otherwise you don't believe me. All right, I got another one for you. The sea has feelings. When we sail on the sea, it will hurt. The sea is in pain every time we put a ship in it. I think we should stop this immediately, now, right away. If I went to the minister and the prime minister and presented these ideas, he would put me in a nut house. He would do that for certain. Because, of course we would. Because we live in a world where you need to have a little better evidence that that's what I felt. That's my experience. In many ways, religious ideas are very similar to that. They are, I really don't say this to mock anybody, but they are insane in a way. They are fascinating and incredible stories of people walking on water, bushes burning, people getting resurrected from the dead, water turned into wine. And all of this are incredible claims. When I talk to many Danish Christians, who I know are very different from Frank, because many Danish priests, for instance, don't really believe in God. They're just sort of intellectuals who are having fun with the Bible. But Christians in the Danish tradition would say, yeah, I know, these are fantastic claims. Yes, I know, but do not take the beauty out of life. Because they're fantastic, they're inspiring, they're incredible. I admit they are. And I don't mean that leaving God out of the picture will make a place that is not inspiring and not fantastic. But what I prefer to do is put this world in a fictional world. I enjoy much more, I love fantastic worlds. I dream of fantastic worlds. I tell my kid stories about monsters that he's in his brains, puts under his bed. And I think they're fascinating. But I want to keep those in the fictional world. Because as a scientist, I need to make distinctions. One of the 3 distinctions which I think are important. One of them is revelation versus experience. These are 2 different things. When people have revelations about the sea having emotions and stuff like that, that is something they experience. They can't test that. They can't validate that. It's something they feel. That is very different from experience, which science uses, where they have different numbers of observers, not only 48 or how many it was here, but many more that can claim that is true, and also look at other instruments that can measure that. Fiction is something else than reality, and hence also science is something else than religion. And I think what I'm trying to do here is also tell you that in your life, there's a lot of religious claims that you would never accept. That insane man coming to the Prime Minister's office saying that the sea's got emotion, you would lock him away. And I think in most of our life, you enjoy that science is very, very different from religion. You think that is important, and you would not, I believe, live in a world that worked the way religion works, because there is too many holes in it. I doubt very much that Frank ever, if he came to the doctor and had a disease of some sort, and the doctor said, yes, you need a chemical here and a chemical here, and I'll put it in your veins and you'll be cured. And if Frank asks him, why do you think that? And the doctor asked, because I dreamt it last night. I don't think Frank would take that medicine. He would think that that's not okay. That's just a revelation you had. That's just an idea you had. It's not factually based. It's something you felt. Religion works that way. It works from all sorts of experiences that people have had, all sort of nightmares they've had, all sort of revelations and personal experiences they've had. We do not take that serious in the scientific work, and I don't think that Frank would take that serious if that happened at a doctor's office. But it's somehow in the religious world that is suspended. And that I think is fascinating, but also a bit dangerous. Because science works in a different way. And a thing that really distinguishes science from religion is also we make claims about the reality and we test it. The religion doesn't test anything, but we test it. We do something and we see if the reality works according to the hypothesis we've made. This is Barry Marshall. He's very interesting because at one point he was pretty sure that the science were wrong with regards to ulcers, mavesår. And he was pretty sure that they were wrong. That's another important thing about science. People love to paint the picture of science as a group of old men who believe in some certain truths and they leave everybody out and they protect those truths. That's not how science works. Science is all about debunking. The greatest thing as a scientist you can do is to prove that all the others were wrong. That's the only way you get articles published, is telling that the other bastards were wrong. So saying that science is sort of its own little religion is completely nonsense. It's been debunked ever again and again and again. We're constantly tearing each other's work apart, and we love doing that. Barry Marshall knew that it was a bacteria. He was certain. His research, his theories showed him it must be a bacteria that causes ulcer. What he did, a lovely experiment, he drank a cup of that bacteria and got an ulcer to prove it was right. And he got the ulcer. That is experimenting with reality, because you have a theory and the world works accordingly. Because it is true, because it says something about the reality. He won the Nobel Peace Prize, he won the Nobel Prize for that. Science is marvelous because it works. We've eradicated a lot of diseases in the world because this works in reality. Our theories, our ideas are not religious. They are fundamental, and we use that in the real world. But the good thing is about science, it makes predictions. We send a satellite out and it actually orbits the planet. Why does it do that? Because our calculations were right, because our idea about the universe were correct. Christians and religious people also make predictions about the world, but they never really turn out as they expected. They've been waiting 2,000 years for Jesus to come back. It is interesting. Remember, when you read the Bible, Jesus was certain, and everybody at his time was certain that apocalypse will come maybe at the end of this week, certainly no later than next month. They were sure of that. They've been waiting for 2,000 years. That is an embarrassment to Christianity. It's embarrassing that for 2,000 years, nothing has happened. That is very, very bad probability. That's very, very little control of reality. That is embarrassing. Does God exist? Well, the fundamental and more interesting question, I think, is there a more likely explanation for the stuff we see? Or another thing is, does there have to be a God? Is God necessary? And I will go deeper into Frank's argument later, but I'll just tell you that there is a lot of stuff in this world. When we as scientists look at this, we think, yes, there might have been eyewitnesses of something, but is it very likely that it is there? Frank tells us that there are many eyewitnesses to Jesus' resurrection. I can tell you there are thousands and thousands of more eyewitnesses to UFOs and the monster in the Loch Ness lake. A lot more. That is still ridiculous claims. Because when we look at it, there are so many more pieces of evidence that support that there are natural explanations for this. Did man land on the moon? Of course he did. Because what's the most likely explanation? That thousands of people at NASA could keep a secret? Can you keep a secret? For how long? For 40 years? That's very unlikely. So the most likely thing is, of course, it's happened. And again, with Jesus and all the other miracles in the Bible, are they very likely? Do we have many eyewitnesses? Or are there more probable explanations for this? Of course there is. When we look into the human brain, there's a lot of elements in the human brain that would suggest us to be easy believers. There's a lot of stuff in our brain that makes us look and see things that are not really there. Just a simple thing for you. Can you see square A and square B? They are exactly the same color. They're exactly the same shade of gray. You cannot see that, but if I cut it out for you, you could see it. This is your brain making a mess out of the reality. This is your brain cheating you on this specific thing. Brains are very good at that because brain wants to keep you thinking something that makes a lot of good sense. Mainly that things in a shadow will be darker than things outside of a shadow. Makes pretty good sense. And the brain loves another thing. It loves to look for meaning. The brain is very crazy about looking for human involvement. The brain is very, very interested in intentions. People can see God, Jesus, or just human beings in everything. Somebody saw Jesus here in the sky. I just think he saw clouds. And here somebody saw the Virgin Mary in a piece of toast. Human beings are incredibly good at seeing things that are not there. And that is a much more probable explanation than we have to sometimes suspend a lot of other physical laws, like turning water into wine. It's like resurrecting people from the dead, like making blind men see. And all the other miracles that Jesus performed, a lot of them have a much more probable explanation, is that we made it up. We simply made it up because that's what human beings do. They have an incredible imagination. It's much more likely that these natural laws, for some reason, some just didn't work. So religion, I think, adds something that real world lacks. That's, of course, moral meaning. I think that's one of the reasons why people love religion. It gives purpose to the world. Somebody created the world and it was good. When I'm a scientist, I don't believe the world was created because it was good. It just happened. Sorry. There's no deeper meaning behind it. It just happened. And it happened out there. It didn't happen a million other places. True. That's why we're the only ones to ponder, why did it happen here? That's why Frank's argument is a bit banal. Yes, the one who won the lottery ticket is also thinking, that's incredible, I won that. But all the millions of people who didn't win the lottery don't go around thinking, that is incredible, I didn't win the lottery. All the universes that did not happen on this planet, they have no chance of pondering why they're not in existence. We're the only ones who can ponder why we actually existed. So it's a logical mistake Frank is using there. It's rhetoric, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. Because the world has no meaning. It's brutal, it's bad. Evolution is not a kind thing. But human beings don't like that. We would love there to be a purpose. We would love to infuse the world around us with human psychology. In all religions in this world, people have done this. They have psychologized the world around them. The sun is jealous of the moon. That's why they can't be on the sky at the same time. People love making psychological ideas about reality. Why are human beings both nasty and good? Because they are both nasty and good. That's the thing I like about the Christian idea of the man is a sinner. Certainly he is. We know that. We make a lot of mistakes. But we do not become sinners because somebody took a magical apple from a magical tree after talking to a snake. This is very, very unlikely way of describing human psychology. It's a sort of childish way to describe the world, but it's not how a rational person would think. The other thing that religion adds to the world is what we call anthropocentrism. That is the idea that the world belongs to us. Human beings are the pinnacle of society. And the guy who invented that and made that looks a lot like us. And God looks a lot like us. He has feelings. He gets jealous. He gets angry. He's very, very similar to human beings. I think it's very likely that he is so because we created him in something that looks like us. It was not God who created man in his image. It was the other way around. We created something very similar to ourselves because Human beings are in love with themselves. They think that the world, the universe, everything exists for them. And they want a creator that looks like them. Evolution does not care about that, because evolution doesn't care about anything. We could have been here, we could not have been here. We are just a chance. We're something that accidentally happened. There is no deeper meaning in the existence of human beings. I know that we would love that there was a deeper meaning with our existence, but there is no deeper meaning with it. The world did not evolve around us. So that God exists because it fits perfectly with preferred mental models of the human mind is a lot more probable than the other things. It's a much more likely explanation than if we would have to suspend the natural laws. Although the last explanation is far more beautiful, fascinating, and mysterious. Or is it? I don't think necessarily it is. I love the real world because I think it's beautiful. Human beings were not created from dust. We were created from stardust, not dirt on the ground. As in the Bible, we were created from stardust. We were created from those elements that we find in stars: oxygen, magnesium, silicon, iron, carbonate. We are the children of stars. I think that is a beautiful thing. That is reality. That's not dream. That's not mythology. That is actually the reality. This insect is perfectly evolved to look into a certain flower. That is a beautiful combination of two animals. A butterfly, or it was a bee this, I think, and a flower. I think that is beautiful. I think the world is full of beautiful things that just evolved. We don't need God to make the picture more beautiful. And this also relates to what Frank said. How can we be good without God? Shouldn't there be some sort of moral mandate out there given by a divine entity? First of all, there's a lot of problems with that argument, and I'll take them just right away, because the problem with it is, if that needs to make sense, then we need to figure out, are people who are religious more moral than other beings? And actually, we've tested that, and it's been tested a couple of times, and we see no result of that. We don't see religious people being more moral than others and more ethical than others. And history certainly have many examples of religion actually doing the opposite. There is plenty of stories of religious people who've blown things to pieces because they were absolutely certain of what they did. And religion and violence, religion and amoral, actually seem to be working hand in hand and do it for a long time and have been doing it for a very long time. This is an abortion, a priest who shot a doctor who did an abortion. I think that is horrible. Or as Steven Weinberg, who's a physicist, said it, religion is an insult to human dignity. Without it, you would have good people doing good things and evil people doing evil things. But for good people to do evil things, that takes religion. So there is no evidence of moral superiority among religious people, which gives us to the argument about, is moral natural? Absolutely. It's a good thing to be good. People like it. People behave better around people who behave nicely, who remember to share, who don't kill people. It's as easy as that. We are moral creatures because it makes evolutionary sense to be so. Because in small groups like this, we see people who are violent, who are aggressive, who are crazy, usually get excluded from the community. It makes good sense to have in your genetics a sense of morality and ethics. Of course it does. It also sometimes give good sense to suspend this and be an asshole from time to time. This is what is so interesting about evolution and human reality. It's a mix of good and evil, because evolution does not have good and evil. It just has chance. And we, the only intelligent creatures on the planet, have to live with that. And again, if we look at societies, and we look at societies that have a lot of religion, are they good societies? Well, that's an interesting thing. If you look at this tablet here, we can see that some of the countries that have least religion, where people think that it's least important in their life, are some of the countries I think most of us would like to live in. But the bottom of this is Egypt, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and the Congo, Sierra Leone. Do you want to live there? I don't. So actually, it looks like if there's something, I don't say that religion creates the situation, because I'm a scientist. I don't know which way the variables point. I cannot tell you the exact causal factors, and I don't want to guess. But there does not seem to be any sort of relationship between morality and religion. The last, and I think also very important question is, would I even like there to be a God? No, I would absolutely prefer there not to be a God. I love this passage. I ended my first book with this passage. It's from Jacques Monod, who tells us exactly why he also wants to have a world that is devoid of God. He talks about reasoning up. If you accept the man, humans, this message in its full significance, man must at least wake out of his millenary dream and discover his total solitude, his fundamental isolation. He must realize that, like a gypsy, he lives on the boundary of an alien world, a world that is deaf to his music and as indifferent to his hopes as it is to his suffering or his crimes. The universe and nature do not care about you. There is no divine authority that cares about you. We would like there to be there. It would be wonderful he was there. But I think the most adult thing to do is to realize that we are alone. That makes a much more beautiful world, because it means that you and I have responsibility for each other. Not because somebody thinks it's good, not to please a man in the sky, but actually because it makes moral sense to us, because we make people happy in this world. But of course we would like there to be a superior being. Back to my son. He thinks I'm a superior being. He thinks everything I do is good. When he gets older, he will have a different opinion about that. But that's how it is. And a lot of us are looking to the sky as little children. But I will tell you, my son, that poem you saw before, and say, no, little man, the world is without meaning. You have to create that. You have to create that with the people around you. That's the only humane thing to do. Because you are alone. You are isolated. And that is beautiful, because it means you have the responsibility. We have the responsibility to take care of ourselves and our lives. We have to grow up. And that means saying goodbye to magical creatures under the bed as well as in the sky. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis, for an equally lively and entertaining presentation. Now we have the 2 points pretty clear, the theist and the non-theist. In sticking to the rules of this debate, each of the debaters have 10 minutes to respond to his honored opponent's point of view. And Frank, you heard Dennis, you heard various points. I saw you were making meticulous notes during his presentation. Now, God is a man-made creation. There is no deeper meaning. Man did not come out of a handful of dust, etc., etc. I think there should be plenty of material for you to attack. You have 10 minutes.
I've been told that last time I went a little bit too slow, so I'll try and speed it up. You see, I speak at 150 words a minute with gusts to 350, so I apologize for going slow. Let me deal with a few things that my esteemed colleague has said, and then I'll talk about a few other things that I think are important here. Dennis said they're fantastic claims that people believe. Well, if a miracle is going to get our attention, it has to be a fantastic claim. If miracles happened all the time, they wouldn't get our attention as signs from God. So they have to be fantastic. I mean, if people were popping up from the dead all over the place, nobody would say anything is great about Jesus' resurrection. It wouldn't point back to God. So miracles have to be fantastic. With regard to science, John Lennox, a friend of mine who has debated Richard Dawkins, puts it this way. He gives his students a question. He says, suppose there's a Ford motor car in front of you. I'm going to give you 2 possible causes for the Ford motor car, and you have to tell me which one you're going to pick, because you can only pick one. Henry Ford or the laws of internal combustion? Immediately, the students see you need both. You need a creator for the car, and then you need the laws of internal combustion that hold it together and allow it to go. Science and religion don't necessarily conflict, because what I'm talking about here is a creator and a sustainer of the universe who created and sustains the natural laws by which things regularly happen. Also, he mentioned there are many eyewitness claims for the Loch Ness Monster and for, who was the other one? UFO sightings, yes, but nobody has died for the Loch Ness Monster or UFO sightings. Nobody said, I'm going to my grave because I saw a UFO or because there were aliens or because I saw the Loch Ness Monster. He said, well, they just made it up. They made it up. These Jews who thought they were God's chosen people made it up to get themselves excommunicated, beaten, tortured, and killed. I think that takes a lot more faith than saying there was a miracle. He also mentioned that religious people are not more moral than non-religious people. I might agree with that. The data might be good on that, but that's not my argument. My argument isn't that atheists can't be good people. My argument isn't that atheists don't know morality. My argument is, what do you mean by good? Why does good exist at all? What is good ontologically? See, this isn't about behavior. This is about the standard. What is the standard? If there is no God, what Hitler did was just a matter of opinion. I don't have enough faith to believe that. Now, I think overall, Dennis's main line of attack here has three major problems behind it. First of all, I believe he's looking at the wrong data. Secondly, he has a self-defeating position. And thirdly, he assumes what he's trying to prove, which is begging the question. Let's start here at number one. Here's what Dennis said in a chapter on religious beliefs. He said the natural explanation, oh, by the way, I put Dennis up here because he's a handsome man, and I don't want you to think this is what I'm saying, this is what he's saying. He says the natural explanation of religion lies in the systems of thought that creates religious beliefs. So the question is, what creates these thoughts? Well, this is what we call the genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy is assuming a belief is false because of how the belief originated. People might have all sorts of different reasons for believing in religion or believing in atheism. Those reasons don't necessarily tell you whether the belief is true or not. It's a fallacy because the origin of a belief can't tell you whether or not the belief is true. You need evidence to discover whether or not the belief is true. You see, Dennis is talking about the psychology of belief. Like the Pharisees, why did they believe what they believed? And Jesus went after them. He said, you nullify the word of God on account of your tradition. You're believing things that aren't true. But you don't learn whether or not God exists or whether Jesus rose from the dead by looking at the psychology of people today, why they believe it. What you do is you go back to the evidence and you look at the evidence from reality to see, was there a beginning? Is there a fine-tuning? Are there objective moral values? Did Jesus rise from the dead? That's how you discover whether or not Christianity or any other religion is true. You don't discover it by looking at the psychology of why people believe or don't believe. Also, the second problem is the self-defeating position. Dennis is here talking about naturalism. Remember, he said the natural explanation of religion lies in the systems of thought that creates religious beliefs. So the question is, what creates these beliefs? Well, he tells us a little bit later on in the chapter, and he said it up here a couple of times. He said, our biology does not care whether we find the truth. It is concerned that we survive. This is typical of what people who believe in macroevolution say, that we're just molecules in motion, and biology doesn't necessarily yield truth, it just yields survival. Well, here's the problem. If that's true, then how do you know that is true or your belief in atheism? In other words, if we're just molecules in motion, how does Dennis know that that theory is true? He's not really coming to it through reason because he's just molecules in motion like you and I are. He is just assuming it's true. So naturalism is self-defeating, and this is commonly known. In fact, theism explains our ability to reason much better than atheism, because on atheism, again, we're nothing but materials. If atheism is true, our minds are just molecular machines, controlled completely by physics and biology, which Dennis admits in his paper, which means that we don't have free will, which means we don't reason, we merely react, which means, therefore, we shouldn't trust anything we believe, including atheism. or including Christianity, if this is true. We shouldn't believe anything because we are just molecular machines. We're no different than a Coke can fizzing. I'm a Coke can fizzing, and Dennis might be a Pepsi can fizzing, and you're a Sprite can fizzing. If we're all just molecules in motion. In fact, Darwin knew this. This was called Darwin's doubt. Here's what Darwin wrote in a letter to a friend. He said, "With me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind if there are any convictions in such a mind?" Thomas Nagel, who is a very profound atheist, a very well-respected atheist at New York University, recently wrote a book called Mind and Cosmos, where he is questioning the neo-Darwinian view of the universe. In fact, that is the subtitle to his book at the top there, Why the Materialist Neo-Darwinian Concept of Nature is Almost Certainly False. And why does he say so? Because conscious subjects like you and me and their mental lives are inescapable components of reality, not describable by the physical sciences. Again, if my thoughts and Dennis's thoughts and Adam's thoughts and your thoughts are just all the product of physics and chemistry and biology, then we shouldn't believe anything we believe. Einstein knew this. Why can we comprehend the world? He said the most incomprehensible thing about the world is that it is at all comprehensible. Finally, he says the fundamental religious ideas one can really experience with his senses, because they are in fact impossible, to walk on water, changing water into wine with a snap of the fingers. In fact, he mentioned that in his talk. He said miracles are impossible. What he's doing here is he's begging the question. How does he know miracles are impossible? If the first verse of the Bible is true, miracles are possible. Why? Because God exists. Well, we have good scientific evidence and philosophical evidence I haven't had time to get into yet, that the first verse is true, that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, then miracles are possible. I mean, if God can create the universe out of nothing, can he do whatever he wants? It's not logically impossible inside the universe? Of course. Can he walk on water? Of course. Can he raise the dead? Of course. In fact, God can do whatever he wants. It's not logically impossible. There's only logically impossible things he can't do. Like what? Like he can't create a square circle. That's logically impossible. There's no such thing. He can't create a one-ended stick. No such thing. He can't create a married bachelor. No such thing. He can't create an honest politician. There are some things that are just too hard for God. But the first verse is true, then other verses are believable. Final point here, and that is, I believe Dennis's argument against miracles is similar to Hume's. It's circular. Why? Because he says miracles don't occur. Why? You ask him, how do you know that? He'd say because all miracle claims are false, or all miracle reports are false. Well, how do you know that? Because there's a uniform experience against miracles. And how do you know that? Because miracles don't occur. You see, you have to evaluate each miracle claim on its merits, and every eyewitness claim on its merits. You have to investigate the Loch Ness Monster claim on its merits. You just can't rule it out. You may find it's bunk, but you've got to investigate it on its merits. You don't just look at the psychology of people to discover whether something's true or false. You look at the evidence. As C.S. Lewis said, if we admit God, must we admit miracles? Indeed, you have no security against it. That is the bargain.
Right, Dennis, you have 10 minutes equally to refute Frank's criticism of your presentation.
Yes, and I will. Well, first, a little more about Frank's presentation. The interesting thing is that Frank seems to need the natural laws. And that's interesting because he thinks that nothing can come from nothing. There have to be some sort of beginning, and I think that the most reasonable thing to claim to have begun things is God. The interesting thing is that, well, how do we know what happened before this God? The idea that something has to come from something is a part of the natural laws. If God invented the universe and everything, then God must be a part of the natural laws. He must have started that, because otherwise he could do whatever he wants. But because he has to follow the natural laws, has to start the universe. This is a logical misordering of things. Because why on earth would God need to do that if he was a creature who could do everything he wanted? So even God is part of the natural laws, which again is a pretty good sign that the natural laws was before God was even there. And again, an even better proof, not a proof, but indication that he never was there to begin with. I'm not a physicist. I don't know much of the details about physicism and exactly what happens, this and where and what. There's probably a Big Bang. I have no problem necessarily with that one. I have the problem with the idea, again, that God should be a better explanation than anything else. As one of the things that Frank says, again, that it's incredible that we are in a universe that came to be. And as I said before, it's not incredible that the only ones who was in that universe that came to be are now pondering about that, because I think that, again, makes pretty good sense. And the interesting thing is, again, that Frank is constantly talking about what makes sense. Again, it makes more sense. And he thinks that, again, that God transcends the world as we know it. But again, why doesn't God really transcend the world? Why does he rely on the natural laws if he's so powerful? And again, the problem with moral, as I said before, how do we know what is good? And as I said before, most people in this world know what is good. They have a natural idea of this. One interesting experiment that's been done on Jewish children, very religious, very devout Jewish children, was to ask them in an experiment, and it's been done a couple of times, do you think God, if he wanted to, could say, you can do whatever you can work on the Sabbath? That is not okay if you're a Jew. And they said, well, probably if God thinks that's a good idea to work on the Sabbath, then it's probably okay. Then they do a little more. Say, okay, do you think God would say it's all right to hit people? And then they go, oh, that's not the God I know. Oh, doesn't sound very likely. But again, if God thinks so. But a lot of them are beginning to doubt there. And at the end they asked them, do you think God could suddenly allow to kill people? It's one of the amendments. You couldn't do that. And then they said no. Then they think that God was probably wrong. So here we have kids who are starting to doubt that phenomenon of God because they don't think that he could do such a thing. Because in reality, their moral and ethical reasoning does not come from their religion. It comes from a place much deeper inside them. If I were to put a knife into Frank's hand, which I wouldn't do, but if I was supposed to do that right now, and it would be sticking out of Frank's hand, what do you think Frank would do to make me take that thing out of his hand? If it was tied in the back of his hand on his back, what would he do? It's the most likely thing he would say, Dennis, remove that fork or knife from my hand because God does not want that. I can tell you the most likely thing that Frank would say is, no, stop it, it hurts. Because he knows that I'm a human being, and that's what I'm genuinely interested in. Because I'm a being with empathy. I don't care about the laws of that God. It's not what works for me in that situation. It's something deeper. It's an automatic response to the world around me. And an automatic response you'll find in all societies if they have God or not, because it makes sense. Because if you go back to the group and start misbehaving, they will kick you out, because that group will not get to where they want to go if that is the behavior that you show. The resurrection is an interesting thing again, and as I said before, there's plenty of other things that people would believe and think and that they can't prove. And I don't really buy that circle there, because I never said that the miracles are false as such. I just said that I want to really see a good miracle. Please, can somebody perform a very nice miracle, something that does not fall into the limitations of natural laws and physics. There's been an award for somebody to do a genuine miracle. I think it was a magician who put out millions of dollars for somebody to perform a real miracle. Nobody has done that yet. We're still waiting for it. It's a nice cash award, but nobody can seem to do it because it's pretty difficult to do. And it's not because when we see it, we'll hide our eyes and say we don't see it. It's because then it's probably not a miracle. Then it's something, again, we can explain within the limits we have, and then it stops being an actual miracle. Oh, what have we more? An interesting thing that the Frank claim is that, I really like Jesus. I think he was a swell guy. I think he's a wonderful moral thinker. And I think that Jesus of Nazareth is a person we should ponder a lot, because I think he said some amazingly interesting stuff. He was not a god. Nobody thought he was a god. He didn't himself think he was a god. It was something invented by the Roman Empire 300 years BC. No, of course not BC, but after Christ. So they thought it was a good idea to make Christ into a god. He didn't believe it himself. But what's so interesting about Jesus of Nazareth is that he told something about how fragile human beings are. So why do the disciples run away from him? As Frank said, that's not embarrassing. It fits perfectly with the narrative. It fits perfectly with the idea in the Bible that humans are fragile persons, that they will do that they will lose their belief. So it makes pretty good sense into the tone of the Bible and into what Jesus thought. And I think there's a lot of good things that he said. One of the things he also said was that he gave much more power to women and let women speak. And he brought women into his court, or whatever you want to call it. So again, that is consistent with the fact, if it is a fact, we don't know, that it was females who he showed himself to after his resurrection. Again, it fits with the narrative. It's not embarrassing. It fits with the whole idea, the political idea of the Bible, which is what it is, and not much more than that. So this is why some of these, stories have survived over the years, because it fits with the general idea in Christianity, which has a lot of positive thing. Jesus just wasn't a god, and he was just a normal human being who said some clever stuff. And again, an interesting thing that Frank says is that people haven't died for the sake of the Loch Ness monster. It's so interesting how Christianity seems to be obsessed with death. It's simply one of the most death-obsessed religions in the world. When you go into a church, it's a freaking torture chamber. As your symbol, you have a torture instrument. There is death and sorrow everywhere. It's a very dark experience. Your religion is completely obsessed with death. This is why for Frank, the more people who have died for it, the better it is. That's an absurd argument. And that's one of the things I really dislike about Christianity, is that you have to die to make it true. Which we certainly have seen many times that people have done in the name of religion. I think it's horrible. And I think it's actually amoral. I think it's actually pretty bad that this is what you need to do to make something true. If there's something that is unethical, it's something that is deeply amoral, deeply disturbing, it's that idea in Christianity.
Right. Thank you very much, Dennis. Now it's time for the so-called dialogue. We have about 30 or 35 minutes for the two of you to engage in a dialogue. I'll be asking some questions. You can ask each other questions if you like. Frank, let me just jump to what Dennis was saying about Jesus, because although you do disagree about a lot of things, that would be very obvious from your presentations. That's why you're here, of course. You do agree in one fact, namely that Jesus actually lived. Now, in your perspective, what did Jesus of Nazareth actually achieve?
He didn't. Am I on?
It's on.
Jesus did, contrary to popular opinion, Jesus did not come to make bad people good. He came to make dead people live. Because we're all, as I think Dennis admitted, rightfully so, we're all sinners. We're all fallen. And he came into this world because he's the only perfect human being who could save us from our sins. I mean, the story of the Bible from Genesis to maps, the one-word theme is redemption. We fall in Genesis, paradise lost in Genesis, paradise is regained in Revelation. And what God does is he comes into the space-time continuum to rescue us, his creatures who have fallen. He takes the punishment on himself for what we have done. And by trusting in what he has done, then God, since he's perfectly just, can allow us into his presence. God can't allow sinners to go unpunished, because then he wouldn't be the standard of justice. So he has to punish somebody who is not a sinner himself, which is Jesus, and that then satisfies his justice, and therefore then he can allow us into heaven. But The idea that Jesus came to make bad people good, I mean, he did have a moral message, as Dennis pointed out. He certainly did. There's no question about it. But that was not his sole purpose. His sole purpose was because we are immoral. He had to come be our example and die for us.
Dennis, do you see Jesus of Nazareth merely as a Jewish freedom fighter, if you like, a philosopher, as you called him perhaps, a moral struggler rather than someone who came for the salvation of mankind?
Yeah, and I think Jesus saw himself as that. Because it seems to be the time after Jesus that they really wanted to, and his disciples and the people who wrote about him, who framed him in that. Jesus was you have to remember one interesting thing about Jesus is that when you look at what he said some weird stuff. He said stuff like, turn the other cheek, go and sell everything you have, turn away from your mother and brother. And he said all of that, and most people after that thought, oh, that is weird. So what they did was they actually put, later on, the people in the church, they took some moral and ethics from the Greeks, the Stoics, to actually fuse that into it, because a lot of what Jesus said was ridiculous, but you have to understand the reason why Jesus said weird stuff with that is exactly because he thought doomsday was near. Doomsday is coming very, very soon. So we are at the end days. And because we are at the end of days, this is how we need to be. We have to have this this moral superiority and do these things that the people around us will find crazy, but they will also admire it so much that it will start to follow us when we die from it. And this is very powerful, and this is the movement he was a part of. But there's a lot of things lacking in Christianity after Jesus that was corrected by the church.
Right, Frank, I'm wondering, when you look into the Bible and you read about all the miracles that Jesus performed, or apparently performed, depending on your point of view, I wonder, and you may refute that, but why is there no evidence left behind of his miracles?
Well, what evidence would you expect there to be left behind, like a living Lazarus or something? I mean, what do you mean?
But there is no evidence.
That would be convincing.
Well, the evidence that you can get that something occurred in the past is you get it via eyewitness testimony. You can also get it through archaeology. You can get evidence that way to figure out what happened in the past. My colleague Ted Wright here always asks people what ship went down in 1912. And if you're in Denmark, you know the Titanic. Because we just asked the question of a bunch of Danish students the other day in school, and they said the Titanic. And his next question was, well, how do you know that? Were you there? No. Is anybody still alive right now from the Titanic? No. So how do you know? Well, you've got eyewitness testimony, and you also have archaeological remains. You have the Titanic at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. That's how you get at history. But let me point out one thing about Jesus' miracles. People think Jesus' miracles were like magic tricks. They were not. Jesus did three kinds of miracles. He had miracles over life, so he could resurrect the dead. He had miracles over sickness, and he also had miracles over nature, so like he could calm the storm. And the reason he did miracles in those three areas is because those are our major three problems. That we have sickness, death, and natural disasters. And when the Messiah comes, he's going to solve those problems. And his ultimate miracle was giving himself for our sin. That's our biggest problem.
Let me just take that to our skeptical scientist, the anthropologist. Obviously, you don't believe in what Frank said, but how do you explain the notion of miracles in the Bible?
It makes pretty good sense. Again, let's put us back in history. That's what I'm doing, an anthropologist. I try to figure out how people might have thought. I don't know, but again, looking at what people usually did. It was not very particular at the time to mix reality with fiction. In Denmark, as you probably know, maybe if you read Saxo's Chronicle, it's a good example of it, which is a historical, you don't know that, it's an historical account of Danish history. It's mixed with myths and reality, and it's at the time it was absolutely okay because they didn't know what was up and down. They didn't have science, so they mixed reality and myths and stories. Jesus Christ is a good example of that himself. We have numerous myths that are very, very similar to that myth. Even Alexander the Great was apparently found somewhere with a poor family, and there was a star on the sky, and there's a lot of these myths and a lot of other stories stories before Jesus of Nazareth where people have died for something and had an extraordinary life with miracles. So what the evangelicalists did was actually just describe a lot of stuff, a lot of myths that were already going around. So I think this mix of fact and fiction is again not embarrassing. It's just how they did it at the time.
Frank, when you listen to this scientific explanation of myth, of miracles, of religion, is there anything in you that makes you waver in your belief? Maybe not because of what Dennis said, but if you look at your whole record as a Christian, have you ever had any doubts, like serious doubts, if God actually created everything around here?
Oh, yeah, all the time. I wrote a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and I have doubts all the time. But I realize that most of my doubts are emotional. They're not intellectual, because I think the evidence for Christianity is quite good. What's changing is me. Sometimes I'm having a good day, everything's fine. Other days I'm having a bad day, everything's not fine. In fact, a friend of mine who's a Christian apologist by the name of Greg Kokel says this. He says, before I have my first cup of coffee in the morning, I'm an atheist. He says, after I have my first cup of coffee, I'm a Jehovah's Witness. And by the time I get my second cup of coffee, I'm back to being a Christian. Now, what's changed? Well, the evidence hasn't changed. He's changed. So we go up and down all the time. Look, the writers of the Bible express doubts all the time. This is the human condition. But you know what doubts do? They drive us to get answers.
What do you think, just to stay with your doubt, what do you think is the most convincing atheist argument you've heard? What could make you waver in your belief? What could make you say, there might be something about this?
Well, I think the most powerful argument against a good God is the existence of evil. Why does it continue? I think there are good answers to that question, but that doesn't disprove God. Because again, there wouldn't be such a thing as evil unless there was good, and there wouldn't be such a thing as good unless God existed. God must have morally sufficient reasons for allowing evil to continue. In fact, the greatest evil of all time to a truly innocent person was his own son, because he was not guilty at all, yet he took the punishment of the world on himself. So God did not exempt himself from evil, if indeed Christianity is true. He entered into the space-time continuum and took evil on himself.
Dennis, you told me just before we got started that you were baptized, you were christened, and you took confirmation when you were 14, and yet you've turned your back on Christianity, and I'm sure you still consider yourself a good moral person. Where does your morality derive from?
Well, it derives, again, as I said, from instinct, from and from my experience, We have an experience that people generally don't like to get tortured and killed and raped. That's a general experience. People who get to be that usually complain about it. And I also experience in my life that if I do good to people, I get a lot of goodness in return. It seems like a win-win situation. It seems like a pretty standard thing to do. And again, I feel as I said before, it's very unlikely that anybody would claim divinity as a reason when they're stuck with something horrible, like putting a fork into people's hand. It's not very likely that they would claim that this is important because of God. They would look at me as a human being and relate to me as a human being because of those experiences. This is how it is. It doesn't take a mandate. It takes an experience that goodness works better.
Frank, Dennis, he loves his children, I'm sure. He loves his wife.
Right.
Maybe his mistress, if he has one. He loves flowers. He loves the nature. We heard him talking about the landscape. So he has some of the same notions as you do as a Christian. So how does that, morally speaking, make him different from your brand of morality?
It doesn't. That's not my point at all. My point isn't that Dennis can't be a good guy. I'm sure he is a good guy. He drove all the way from Copenhagen to do this. He's a good guy, right? That's not the point. The point isn't whether or not atheists can be moral, or let me be fair, an agnostic can be moral. The point isn't whether or not an agnostic or an atheist can know morality. Dennis knows morality. He said it's instinct. I might call it self-evident. We call that in our country. It is self-evident. You don't need the Bible to know right from wrong. In fact, even the Bible teaches that. It says that the law is written on the hearts of people. Everyone knows right from wrong. My point is not how we behave or how we know how we should behave. My point is, what is the standard of morality? Let me put it this way. An atheist can say there is no God and believe that certain things are right and other things are wrong. Just like somebody could read a book and know what the book says, But there would be no book unless there was an author of the book. And there would be no good unless there was an author of the good. See, on Dennis's view, it's just his opinion against Hitler's opinion. Now, I side with Dennis's opinion, but if there's no standard beyond you and Hitler, how do you decide, or how do we know who's right?
Well, because the majority of people believed he was an asshole. Because the majority thought that what he did was wrong. There was a small minority in the world of Nazi Germans who thought that that was the moral and ethics of that empire, which it became, because they thought that it was that. Because there's actually something very similar to religious belief in a totalitarian idea. That is something that is powerful, something that is enigmatic and right, and we have to do that, and a paradise sort of moment will come when we've removed all the Jews. There is actually in many totalitarian ideas quasi-religious beliefs. So again, as you can see, we have many examples of religious people doing horrible, horrible acts because they were certain of that. And I think that sometimes you can suspend that moral if you have a very powerful man who can tell you that that's how it is. That's the danger of totalitarian ideas, and certainly also the danger in religion.
Yeah, but Dennis, is your view that morality is determined by the majority?
Well, it is actually, in the sense that if you...
So in Nazi Germany, they were right for Nazi Germany to
No,
murder the
because
Jews,
they
the
were wrong
homosexuals, the
against...
gypsies, and the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Because they were wrong against humanity, because humanity is far, far larger than that small group of people that were Germans at the point, like the communists and Stalin.
Well, let me ask you this. Suppose Hitler had won World War II. If he hadn't attacked Russia, maybe he would. And suppose he brainwashed everybody to believe that all homosexuals, all Jews, all gypsies, all Jehovah's Witnesses should die. So the entire world thought that was right. Yeah. Would it have been right?
No, but it would certainly be possible. And that's what I mean by that human beings are what they are. That means they can also be prone to strange and idiotic thoughts like that, and can be convinced that that is necessary for their own survival. Because we are also fragile human beings who can be tempted to that. So yes, could Hitler have eradicated the whole world? Yes, and I think if he came to power over the whole world, that's what he would have done, because that was the craziness of his idea.
Well, Frank, let me just stay with this issue of violence and religion or non-religion. Why do you think, and this goes back to Dennis's presentation, why do you think so many religions, Christianity included, are prone to the use of violence? Because that would seem to run counter to the very idea of religions being propagating peace, love, and happiness.
Yes, I agree that many religions are prone to violence, and I'm ashamed of the Christian violence that when it has been perpetrated. I don't think it adheres to the words of Christ. In fact, it is the illogical outworking of Christianity. But forgive me for saying this, but the logical outworking of atheism is what Hitler did. Because Hitler, in Mein Kampf, used evolutionary theory in order to say that if the weaker do not want to fight, they have no desire, or they have no right to live, because we are working our way to an evolutionary higher frame of being. He used evolution to justify the Holocaust. So it's the logical outworking of atheism. It's the illogical outworking of Christianity. You don't judge a philosophy by its abuse.
But Frank, sorry, I should just add as a historian, it was well known that the Vatican, that is the Catholic Church, of course, and the Mufti of Jerusalem, that is at the time the highest Islamic body or representative, actually supported Hitler, mainly because he was trying to eradicate the world of Jews.
Well, I don't speak for Islam.
No, but he did get religious backing, that's what I'm saying.
And I don't speak for the Roman Catholic Church either. Just to say there are some Christians and some Muslims that have done evil doesn't mean that the tenets of their worldview or their religion promotes evil. Now, I might argue that if you read the Quran, and particularly Surah 9, you could take away the fact that jihad is something they're commanded to do, but that's certainly not the case with Christianity. So yes, Christians have done evil, there's no question about it, but it's against what Christ said, not congruent with what Christ said.
Dennis, how do you explain the fondness of certain religious people to use violence? We see that a lot in jihadist Islam, but we've also seen that in Christianity, or as we know from Israel, Orthodox Jews, who are some of them very militant. So it would seem that many religious people, some religious people I should add, harbor very strong violent feelings.
Well, that's because they believe that they have an idea and they have something that is more important than the humans around them, and that the humans around them are wrong, that they should change their opinions, that there is a world out there that's going to be perfect, and you have to eradicate the human beings that will prevent this world from becoming true. So they have ideas that are more important than humans around them, which is their gods, their paradise, this certain, the feeling. They're concerned that human beings will somehow destroy what is God's masterwork or something like that. So they can say, well, we can kill a couple of souls here. We can fly a couple of planes into buildings because there is a higher purpose. For a humanist like me, there is no higher purpose than humanity. If you're going to kill humans to do that, you're using humans as a mean. And I think as a good moral thing is saying, no, humans should never be used as a mean. Humans are the purpose. The God's will is not the purpose. Nothing else but humans can be the purpose. And that's where I think a lot of religions go very wrong. I also want to correct one thing. That Hitler used Darwinism and evolutionism is actually wrong, because he used a certain vulgar sense of Darwinism. What I actually showed you before was that idea that there is a certain ladder, that we can get to a higher stadium, and at some point we will be sort of superior. And that is exactly an absurd, vulgar representation of Darwinism and evolutionism, that there is a purpose. And I've made it very clear that there is no purpose. There's absolutely no purpose. Human beings, the Aryan race, none of that is the pinnacle of evolution. There is no pinnacle of evolution. So Hitler got it dead wrong. It was, and the Third Reich was crazy about the occult. They had lots of occult ideas. It was a deeply religious, in another sense, sort of
a doctrinaire society.
Yeah.
Frank, you want to jump in on this?
Sure, yeah. Obviously, we could go back and forth on Hitler, but let's leave Hitler aside for a second. And let's just talk about Mao and Pol Pot and Stalin, who were avowed atheists. They killed more people in 20 years than all of the despicable religious activity over 500 years. In fact, if you take the Inquisitions, the Crusades, put all that together, you've got about 200,000 dead. Awful. Religions ought to be ashamed of that. But if you take Mao, Pol Pot, and Stalin, you've got nearly 100 million dead. Now, they had no reason to not kill people if there's no God. Because there's no judgment in the afterlife. Why not kill everybody to get what you want?
And Danish, you're not exactly a proponent or defender of Stalin, Pol Pot, and Mao. But doesn't Frank have a point that ideologies, in this case hardcore communist ideologies, have actually killed off so many more people than religions have ever done?
Of course they do, because again they work with a quasi-religious idea that there is a certain stage you can only come to if we do these horrible acts. I'm not an atheist, as I'm a non-theist, and I'm a humanist. Stalin was certainly not a humanist. Hitler was certainly not a humanist, and Christianity is certainly not a humanist ideology or religion, because it says that God is more important than the human beings. And I live in a world where I think the most important thing are the human beings. Stalin did not believe that those human beings were important. He believed in the idea of transforming the society into a new state. He was not a scientist. He had one of his scientists, Trofim Lysenko, work with a political idea that he could take seeds and tell them to resist frost. Because that fitted with his idea that everything could be created by nurture and not nature. Because he hated Darwin, actually. He hated the evolutionist idea because he thought it was bourgeois. So he insisted on his scientists to do bad science because it fitted better with his political ideology. It's not humanism, it's not scientism, it's hocus pocus.
Right. Dennis, you can refute that.
But Dennis, you were saying a few minutes ago that life has no meaning. That humans get to decide what the meaning is.
Absolutely.
Okay, so why can't Stalin just decide his meaning is to kill everybody that gets in his way?
Because, as you can see again and again with people like Pol Pot and Stalin, they have been stopped. They've been stopped by a majority outside who said this is not okay, either from outside or from inside.
They weren't stopped until they killed millions.
No, because they had the power to do that. They had the power to put themselves that. Because they told them that what we do here is important for everybody, even though you might not realize it. which is exactly the same as religion is doing, which is exactly why Osama bin Laden can put planes into skyscrapers, because he tells people that what you're doing here is much more important. The purpose is bigger than those human lives.
Yes, I'm not here to defend Islam. I'm here to defend Christianity, which says every human being is made in the image of
No,
God.
but Timothy McVeigh, who bombed the Oklahoma City
is,
building.
McVeigh was doing it in the name of Christianity? Do you think Jesus commanded McVeigh
but
to go do
I
that?
certainly think that he was convinced that that was the case.
Well, he may have been ill. He may have abused Christianity. But if there is no meaning to life, and every human being gets to decide, you have exactly a Stalin or a Pol Pot or
That's interesting, because that's very similar.
Mao do exactly what they did on your worldview.
Yeah, but
on the Christian worldview, everyone in this room and everybody outside this room is made in the image of God, and they have an inherent right to life. Do people abuse that? Yes, they do. But again, you don't judge it by its abuse. You judge it by its proper use.
But it's interesting, because it sounds very similar to the apologetic views of communists who say, well, there's nothing wrong with the ideology. We accidentally kill millions and millions of people, but the idea is still good. And I think when an idea again and again over time commits the same crimes, I think it's very likely there's something fundamentally wrong with that idea. Like, I think there's something fundamentally wrong with communism, because they have no respect for human life. And I think there's a likelihood that there's something fundamentally wrong with religion, since it keeps doing the same thing. And you keep making excuses saying, oh, it's not real religion, it's somebody who misunderstood it. They're crazy.
It's not Christianity.
Do you see the parallel, that they were just contesting totalitarian ideologies, whether that be Christianity or some communist ideology?
Oh, sure. People can come up with all sorts of different ideologies. And you notice our discussion here implies a moral standard. I mean, we all agree that it's wrong to kill human beings. The question is, why is it wrong to kill human beings if there's no God? That's the question. Where does this standard come from? And
that's a good question. Let me just bring that to Dennis. You're a self-declared humanist, and you adhere to some of the same principles as any Christian in here, that one should not kill one's neighbor. On the other hand, where do you get your morality from?
As I said again, from experience, because we generally have an experience that tells us that people who get raped, who get tortured, who get killed, who get hit for no reason, who live with the torture and the killing, random killing of people, they get pretty fed up with it, and they want it to stop.
But then there's no system to it.
Sorry?
There's no system.
No, of course there's no system. There's no system in this world. There's just what happens when people come together. I don't think there's any society either. There's just individuals going around and something pops up. The thing we see around it looks like a system. That's why people who are Christians could get a wow sensation of it. It looks like this whole thing was planned.
But Dennis, Frank, and the Christians in here, they have the 10 Commandments that they follow, that they adhere to, that they...
Well, we actually don't.
Sorry?
We're actually 12.
You don't?
Yeah.
No, the 10 Commandments are for the Old Testament. 9 of the 10 are repeated in the New Testament.
Well,
we follow the moral law. I'm not trying to be technical with you.
You're right.
I'm just pointing out we live by grace.
The point I was trying to make was that you have a certain guideline. Thank you very much, actually. That's the first time one of my mistakes has been applauded. Well, it wasn't mine. Anyway, thank you very much again. No, I think it was for Frank. But the point of the matter is that the Christians, whatever commandments they live by, they have a moral set of guidelines. I'm an atheist, you are non-theist, and there are a few other agnostics and atheists in here. I know why I don't kill my wife or children, why I don't rape my wife's sister, although she's really good looking. Sorry, but I know why I don't, because I'm a moral human being. Yeah. But maybe the derivative of these ideas actually stem from Christianity, or in my case, Judaism.
But look at these 12 commandments, and you see that a lot of them are actually quite interesting and a little bit silly. A lot of them has to do with, do not have any gods than me. God seems to be an extremely jealous fellow who's very concerned everybody would idealize an image that is not him. So he's very concerned with that. Another thing that the Christians tend to do is that they mix moral and what we would call norms. A thing that the Christians would say is that you should not, for instance, be a homosexual. That's a typical thing, because they say it's immoral. But what they're doing there is confusing morals and norms. And the same thing, you have a system here that is 2,000 years old. from older than 2,000 years old, from ancient world where they had a lot of norms and ideas that were important to these people. And they fused them and put them in commandments, and it's all a mix of norms and morals. Can people be homosexual? Certainly, because that's nothing to do with moral. It has everything to do with norms. It has absolutely zero to do with morals, because morals are universal and norms are not universal.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we can get back to the topic of the debate, and that is, does God exist?
Sure.
Because I'd love your insights on a couple of things I mentioned, Dennis, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of
you
course.
said you accept the Big Bang.
Okay, let's get back to that.
Right? And you said you accept the Big Bang, but you think there's a better explanation. So what is it?
I have no idea, because as I said, I am not a physicist. I am strongly, I know that there are going to be physicists out there who have experimented with stuff, who have good reasons to believe this. And I'll tell you what, I don't know how baking powder works either, but I don't believe that my cake goes up in the air because of magic. When I drive my car, I don't know exactly how a combustion engine works, but I believe it's not magic. I know that you'll think, oh, that's silly, why put his faith in the hands of scientists? Because there's a lot of, things out there to know something about. And scientists have you might name drop a few people who in their late lives started to doubt. It doesn't prove of anything. There's always going to be a few scientists out there who need to seek some attention. And want to
Dennis,
say something unpopular.
Einstein was not a Christian. He also denied being an atheist. He denied being a pantheist.
So what?
So he didn't have any late in life conversion. I got to come up with general relativity. In fact, he discovered that when he was quite young. The point was that space, matter, and time had a beginning. So the cause can't be made of nature. It can't be made of space, matter, and time. It must be something beyond nature.
Cause? Why are you so interested in the cause? That's why I asked before, why are you so interested in
why
the cause?
Why a cause? Isn't that what science looks for, causes?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So,
but why do you God needs cause? Isn't he above that?
Well, he doesn't need a cause, that's right, because if he's timeless, he didn't have a beginning.
So why do you need him?
He created everything and sustains everything.
Why does he have to create it if he needs to follow the natural laws? So that means the natural laws will be before God. You're having a logical problem there.
Why does he have to follow natural laws if he created the laws?
Because you said that there have to be somebody who starts it. There have to be something before what is here. So that means somebody must have started that. Why does somebody have to start it? Because of the natural laws. Well,
if he transcends natural laws, before there was any time or space, there were no natural laws. He creates the space-time continuum. He is distinct from the space-time continuum. Why does he have to obey natural laws? We don't have to obey natural laws. Mm-hmm. We can overpower natural laws. Mm-hmm. If a football player heads a football as the ball's coming down, he is interrupting gravity and he's sending it back up. Mm-hmm. If he can overpower a natural law, why can't God?
Mm-hmm. Dennis, why was the world not created?
Well, could he answer that?
No. Not the ball thing.
I have answered that. We get to this.
We don't play basketball in this country. We're footballers.
Football, that's what I said. He heads it.
But the thing is, why was the world not created in 6 days, 6,000 years ago?
Oh, because of a lot of reasons. Because again, if that were to be true, there's a lot of stuff out there that is completely understandable. The fossils we have, the carbon dioxide method that we can see that actually there is so much of a timing in how this carbon disseminates. What's it called? I'm not.
Carbon-14, radioactive dating.
Exactly.
Yes,
so there's a lot of stuff out there that needs to be explained if God were creating the world in 6 days. Again, the simplest solution is that all of this is correct, and that God created 6 days in 6 days is crazy and extremely implausible.
Yeah, well, you may be surprised to know I don't believe that God necessarily created the world in 6 consecutive days. So,
I'm not surprised, Frank. I don't think that you're that crazy.
That's not,
how long did it take God to create the universe?
Well, if you assume the laws of physics have not changed, the universe was created 13.82 billion years ago. That's if the laws of physics haven't changed, and that's an assumption we can't prove. But again, the issue isn't when the creation. The issue is there was a creation. And so as I asked before, if we can overpower natural law, why can't God who created them do so?
No, Frank, let me just get this straight. Why do you say that's not the issue? I've been to your country a lot, and whenever I talk to Christians, they do hammer in the point, God created the world in 6 days, 6,000 years ago. That seems to be a mantra.
Well, there's many Christians who don't believe that, like me, necessarily. I mean, I'm open to it, but I think the better evidence is that the universe is 13.87 billion years old. If you want to talk about Genesis, I'd be happy to talk about Genesis for a few minutes.
So you don't buy the whole package of the Bible?
No, I do. Look, the first verse of the Bible says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, when did God create? In the beginning. When does the first day begin? It begins in verse 3 with the phrase, and God said. And if you notice, Genesis is a poetic historical account. The first 3 days God creates, the second 3 days he fills. And the word day has 4 possible usages in the first chapter and a half of Genesis. It could mean 24 hours. It could mean 12 hours, because in one verse he says he called the day night and the night, or he called the darkness night and the light day. It could mean an era, like if I were to say Roger Federer was a great tennis player in his day. You wouldn't think that Roger Federer could just light it up for 24 hours, right? You'd say it was an era. And then it could mean an unending period of time, like the 7th day, which is going on right now. The 7th day hasn't ended yet because we're still in God's rest. Also, if you look at, say, the 6th day, God names all the animals. It doesn't seem like he could name all the animals in that one day. You know how many animals are out there? I went over to the Randers, the rainforest the other day. That was just amazing how many animals were in there. I mean, Brad Stein, who's a Christian comedian in our country, has a little skit where he talks about that. He goes, when Adam began to name the animals that day, he was real creative. He'd see an animal come by, he'd go, hippopotamus. He'd see another one come by, he'd go, rhinoceros. By the end of the day, he's going, cow. Ox. So the Bible doesn't necessarily teach it's 6,000 years old, because there are 4 possible usages of the word day in the poetic historical account known as Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's in the very first verse.
So my question to you, why do you think God did it?
Because we have evidence that God did it. We have evidence from the creation of the universe that the cause is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, and powerful. We have evidence from the fine-tuning of the argument that this being is intelligent. We have evidence from the moral argument that he's moral and personal. So when you have an immaterial, timeless, spaceless, powerful, intelligent, moral creator, that's exactly what all men know to be God.
Dennis, is there any, I asked Frank before if he ever felt any doubt about his religion. I suppose the same question should be asked to you. Do you have any doubt when it comes to being critical or skeptical of the non-existence of any God? I mean, is there anything that could make you change your opinion and say, yeah, maybe the whole setup has been created in an intelligent manner by someone, because there must have been something before there was nothing?
Well, the fact that I'm a minority. You know, it's interesting that actually we are a minority. The atheists are a minority.
No, you're not an atheist.
The atheists, the non-theists, whatever, the agnostics. There are few of us. Well, it's just names. There are few of us, and I think, of course, that could make a powerful argument for there is something here. But again, as I said, it's very likely that this is just a part of the human brain. And again, get back to that argument, because of an interesting argument that Frank put forward. And just because it is in the brain does not mean it is false.
But Dennis,
let him just finish.
I'm sorry. Okay.
You present it that just because the religion resides in the human brain, that means it's necessarily false. That I've never said that. That would be a crazy claim. You know, love is in my brain as well. My love for my kid is in my brain. It's part of my system. There is that false because it's in my brain? Absolutely not. Consciousness is in my brain as well. I know you find it very hard to understand, but it is. You can knock it out. We have done that. Scientists have knocked it out. It's not a pleasant thing to do, but they've tried. You know, consciousness, free will, all of these things can be knocked out of your brain because it's where it is. It is in the molecules. There is no soul. And again, I cannot see what a soul or a spirit or anything like that adds to anything. It just creates more confusion. Because actually we know from the neurosciences that we can remove some of these things. And I think because it's in the brain, doesn't make it a phantom.
Well, I'm sorry.
But it doesn't make it true either.
No, you're right. But what I'm saying is you need to get outside of your brain and look at the real world to discover what is true. You just can't look at the psychology of someone and decide if something's true or false.
Yes, I can, because my argument was, if you look at what is most likely in the world, is the most likely that a lot of miracles happen, that water gets turned into wine, that incredible things happen, or is the most likely thing that is all taking place in our minds? That is why I put that argument in there, because I think when you look at that and hold the two things together and confront it with each other, it's much more likely that all of these things happen in our brain, because humans are imaginative creatures. We make up stories like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. We do that every day. It's part of who we are.
Yeah, but Dennis, that doesn't mean that every historical account is a made-up story.
No, but it doesn't
Okay,
make it
so you
true
have
either.
to evaluate each one on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
It's like the Titanic sinking, just because you may imagine, in fact, about 12 years before the Titanic sank, there was a novel that came out. It was eventually titled The Titan, where a ship went on its maiden voyage from England and hit an iceberg and sunk. And that was fiction. And then it really happened. Just because somebody thought of it as fiction before doesn't mean it didn't happen later in reality. You have to evaluate the claims based on evidence, not just psychology. But let me go back. You said something that I just want to verify. You said it goes on in my mind. Do you believe the mind is the brain, or do you believe that the two are distinct?
The mind is the brain. There is nothing but the molecules inside my head.
Well,
That
then
is
why
what
should
there
you
is.
believe anything you think?
Why shouldn't I believe? Just because it's part of, as I said before, I feel the love for my kid. That is a real thing because it takes place in my brain. Is consciousness an illusion? It might be. It might be the mind playing tricks on me, but I kind of like that illusion. I think it's fun. And you might kind of like your illusion of God, and you might think it's fun, and it's very good. But do not influence my world with your God, because it's part of your imagination.
So I have an imagination then.
Yeah.
I'm not just a brain in a vat. I have a mind that can actually make decisions, free will decisions, and you can too?
It can
Well, if you
create
can, well, then
patterns.
you're not a materialist then, if you believe that you have free will.
Why not?
Because if everything is the result of a previous natural cause determined by the laws of physics, then you don't have free will. But if you think you have free will, then everything that you think isn't determined by the laws of physics. You are a self that decides to do things.
Does the believing God give you a free will?
What's that?
Do you have a free will as a God believer?
Oh, I think everybody has a free will, whether they're believers or not. My point is, on atheism, if atheism is true and we're just molecules in motion, there is no free will. That's one of the things that troubled Einstein the most. He was a materialist, and he said, how can we have free will if everything is molecules in motion? That's what I think is the fatal flaw in atheism. Because it tries to say everything is material, but then it steals from a theistic worldview in order to argue against it. It tries to say, well, I've got all these reasons that I'm freely coming to a conclusion that these reasons are true to say that theism is false. But in order to come to a free will decision, you have to assume you're not just a brain. You have to assume you have a mind. You have to assume you have a soul.
Frank, you know, I play football, not now, because I have a knee injury, but normally I play football every Saturday, and I play with a bunch of guys from Nigeria, and they all God-fearing, really lovely chaps. And one of them told me not too long ago, hey, Adam, you know what? When we pray, we can heal the ill people.
We can hear what?
We can heal the sick people
heal the sick
with our
people.
prayer. I said, oh, that's wonderful. Are you sure you can do that? Because I have a slight flu. Yes, if I pray for you. And then I asked him one question, which I'm going to ask you, and that relates to our debate on imagination. If you can heal the sick people by praying, how come you cannot heal people, you know, amputees? You know, you meet a lot of Christians who say, yeah, I prayed for my mom because she's sick with cancer, and my prayers helped her. And you say, oh, that's brilliant. But you cannot heal an amputee with your prayers. So how come God is distinguishing?
That's an excellent question. In fact, Craig Keener, who teaches at Asbury Seminary, has a 2-volume book called Miracles. It's over 1,000 pages long. And he investigates some of these claims. I'm not totally convinced you couldn't heal somebody who's an amputee. But remember that miracles are always done by God. They are always in the realm of God. And the reason that miracles occurred in the Bible, if you want a kind of a macro view of it, most of the time miracles were occurring, they were occurring in three basic periods. When God was doing miracles through people, he was doing them through Moses, Elijah and Elijah, and Jesus and the apostles. Why? Because these people had new revelation that needed new confirmation. How are people going to know that Moses speaks for God? Because God does miracles through him. And then the apostles were able to do it to show people that they really spoke for God. Some Christians believe miracles have ceased because there's no need for miracles anymore. Now that the revelation has been confirmed, you don't need miracles to occur anymore. Others say miracles still occur, but on a much more limited basis. Keener has done the groundwork on this and has some very good evidence of modern-day miracles. But they don't occur in bunches anymore because there's no new revelation that needs new confirmation.
Can I briefly ask the audience, how many of you, just raise your hands, how many of you actually believe in miracles? How many believe... Whoa, that's a lot of people. I know there were a lot of Christians in here. Dennis, do you believe in miracles? Do you believe in something extraordinary taking place which cannot be explained scientifically or by the tissue of your brain?
No. I believe that there's certainly things out there that is very, very difficult to understand. I do not claim that we got it everything right. That's why I used the example before of Barry Marshall, who went against every scientific idea there was about what caused ulcers. And he was fighting that because he said, this is not true. So yes, there are limitations. We are trying to get there. I don't think miracles really helps us as an answer in that process. An interesting thing about miracles is that most of them are acknowledged by people who believe in miracles in retrospect. You know, something happened and then it's miraculous. It's very rare you see people, I will now perform a miracle here, and then it happens. So it's a way that people are trying to understand something that they, for a certain period of time, are not able to really understand. And so is science. Science is working with the same methodology. They're trying to figure out what happened here, and they're going to probe that and look into that. But they will not say it happened because there was a will out there that we cannot see, that something mysterious that cannot be captured by any instrument did that, because that is not sufficient. And if we don't know the answer yet, we will keep looking. But there are certainly limitations right now, but we are trying to get there. It would be arrogant of me to say that there's nothing out there we right now cannot explain.
We're nearing the point where the two of you should be making your closing remarks, but I just want to ask you, since we're here in a room with a lot of mainly young believers, do you find it problematic, or even, if you like, dangerous for society, a society such as ours, to have so many young, vigorous God believers?
No, not really. You know, as I said,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. What was the question?
No, I was mainly asking, you know, since we're talking in a Danish context, not an American, I was just asking Dennis if he finds it problematic that we have a society with, at the moment, Christianity may not be growing, but is it problematic that there are a lot of young people here who are willing to propagate the beliefs of Jesus?
Why would it be problematic if there's no meaning to life?
Well, I'm asking Dennis.
I don't see the problem here, because we live in a country where science have a firm hold, and where reason really matters a lot. I would be much worried in places like Africa, where right now we see religion having a greater and greater role in society because they're uneducated people, so they easily fall victims of this. The people.
That's
here,
the atheist.
But in this room, you're going to live in a society that has a lot of reason and rationality around it. So you will change that attitude, a lot of you, when you grow older, which I'm confident that you will, and I hope, because the society around you will protect you from a lot of those ideas. But I fear for Africa, and I fear for the power of religion, also in places like the United States, which is a much less educated place than Scandinavia is, which is why probably that they have so much religion over here that we don't have here. So there seems to be, because we know that also from the evidence, there seems to be at least some sort of, in societies where people read little, in societies with a lot of illiteracy, there tends to be more religion. It doesn't mean that religion causes that, but there seems to be some sort of combination of not knowing very much and being religious.
Mm-hmm. Frank, just before you get your 5 closing minutes, as Dennis will have, there's just one question I'll ask you, as the atheist that I am. You know, when people pray, maybe not for miracles, but when they pray, you know, oh, please let me avoid starvation or let me get a job or something, you know, often they're not heard by God. How come? How come God is not listening, you know, in a very critical moment? You know, in your own country,
Sure, yeah.
in the wake of the financial crisis, we've seen a lot of God-fearing people, you know, on their knees, praying to God, if I could just keep my home, please, dear God, and they don't. So my basic, and I don't mean to tease you, it's really out of curiosity, how come God does not answer their prayer?
Well, I would imagine if God answered every prayer that I ever asked for, I wouldn't be here right now. I'd be flying planes somewhere because I wanted to be a pilot. God, let me pass that flight test. And my eyes weren't good enough. My son's a pilot right now. But I wouldn't be right here if I wanted to marry somebody else at one point. Thank God that didn't work out.
But then what good is praying?
Because we don't pray for our will, we pray for his will. And since he knows the end from the beginning...
I think you're among friends here.
No, but it is a serious question. And it is a serious question because the purpose of life is to know God and to make him known. It's not to make me happy all the time here. In fact, if I got everything I wanted, I'd be even more of a moral monster than I already am. What do we call kids who get everything they want? Spoiled. What's spoiled about them? Their character. Why? Because they get everything they want when they want it. God sometimes says no because we need to grow. And sometimes the only time you do grow is when you go through difficulty. As C.S. Lewis said, sometimes you only look up when you're on your back. He said, pain is God's megaphone to arouse a morally deaf world. And we're deaf sometimes. We don't want to hear. In fact, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask, how many people in here have come to Christ because of pain? In other words, that was the initial thing that got you to start to consider God. We have, 10 or 20 people in here who say yes. I grow through difficulty more than I do when everything's going well. And God knows that. In fact, the Bible even says that. When it says in several places that when you go through difficulty, it's going to build character. And in Hebrews, it says that endure God's discipline because he's treating you as sons. God is a father, he's not a grandfather.
Right. Listen, I know we could go on for hours. If there had been a commercial break and a popcorn vendor, we could have gone on maybe until midnight. But we have pretty much to close it. So each of you will have 5 minutes to come with your closing remarks. Maybe 4 if you don't have 5 minutes in you. I think you could pretty much wrap up what you've said. I mean, it's obvious to the audience, and I'm sure it was even before we got started, what your two positions are. But just to give all of us something to say farewell on. Dennis, would you mind starting? Well, no, you're pointing to Frank. Frank, will you take the lead? 5 minutes. Closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Yes, I will. I'll need the PowerPoint again if you don't mind. Just, if you don't mind, give me just a minute to get oriented here. If you remember, I gave, hang on one second. I gave 4 arguments for the existence of God. The beginning of the universe, fine-tuning of the universe, objective moral values, and resurrection. Dennis hasn't really responded to any of these except to say that they made up the resurrection. Well, again, why would Jews who thought they were God's chosen people, they already had their own world religion, they already thought they were God's chosen people, why would they risk everything for a new religion since they were God's chosen people already? Why would they get excommunicated, beaten, tortured, and killed over and over again? In fact, Dennis already mentioned, you can't keep a lie together very long. Well, it wasn't a lie because they saw Jesus, touched Jesus, ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses he had risen from the dead. Now, the question is, does God exist? I obviously say the answer is yes. If Dennis is going to say no or he doesn't know, then he has to give evidence for his worldview. If his worldview is materialism, how can everything be material? If it's not materialism, then how does he ground immaterial things like the laws of logic, like the laws of mathematics, like the laws of morality, if there is no God? So I think it's quite clear that God does exist. And in fact, in order to deal with this, I'd want to end talking about if Christianity is true, so what? Well, in order to figure that out, we got to answer, why did Jesus come? He even tells us why he came. For it says, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, many people in here are thinking, a ransom? A ransom? I don't need a ransom. I'm a pretty good person. I can make it to God on my own if he exists. I don't need somebody to pay a ransom to get me off. You know why? Because we have a relative moral standard in our mind. From the moral giant Mother Teresa, the Catholic nun who devoted herself to serving the poor in Calcutta, down to the moral midget Hitler. And then next to Hitler, we put criminals. We know they're not quite as bad as Hitler, but they're bad. And then next to criminals, we put all the immoral people we all know. You know, our immoral friends and relatives who aren't quite as good as we are, because our picture's right here next to Mother Teresa. And then if we believe in heaven and hell at all, we arbitrarily draw a line in the sand and we say, these are the bad people, they're going to hell, and we're the good people, we're going to heaven. That's not the way the moral universe really works. We don't make up morality. Then you have the problem of Mao and Hitler and everybody else. There's a moral standard beyond all of us, and all of us are falling short of that standard. From the moral giant Mother Teresa down to the moral midget Hitler, we've all fallen short. And what Christ has come and done is he's come and lived a perfect life in our place. And when you put your trust in him, you're not only forgiven for what you've done, you're given his righteousness. So when God sees you, he no longer sees all your sins, he sees what Christ has done. Now, why wouldn't you want that? If you don't want it, that's fine. God won't force you into heaven against your will. If you don't want God now, you won't want him in eternity. Now, I want you to think about this man for just a minute. Even if you don't think some of the evidence with regard to the resurrection is good, I just want you to think about the impact this man has had. I was at the University of Maryland not long ago, and there was a young man who was down on the New Testament. And I could tell he didn't know much about it, so I finally asked him, I said, have you ever read the New Testament? He was flummoxed. He had never read it. I said, you're rejecting something that you haven't even read? I said, I don't care where you're from, how you were brought up. Unarguably, the person named Jesus of Nazareth is the most influential person in the history of humanity. If you call yourself an intellectual, somebody who's searching for truth, you can't not look in at what he allegedly said. You have to go at least read it. Now, I want you to consider how impactful and influential this man has been, even though he came from a very humble place. This is called a solitary life, one solitary life. He was born in an obscure village, the child of a peasant. He grew up in another village where he worked in a carpenter shop until he was 30. Then for 3 years, he was an itinerant preacher. He never wrote a book. He never held an office. He never had a family or owned a home. He did not go to college. He never lived in a big city. He never traveled 200 miles from the place from where he was born. He did none of the things that usually accompany greatness. He had no credentials but himself. He was only 33 when the tide of public opinion turned against him. His friends ran away. One of them denied him. He was turned over to his enemies and went through the mockery of a trial. He was nailed to a cross between two thieves. While he was dying, his executioners gambled for his garments, the only property he had on earth. When he was dead, he was laid in a borrowed grave through the pity of a friend. 20 centuries have come and gone, and today he is the central figure of the human race. I am well within the mark when I say that all the armies that ever marched, all the navies that ever sailed, all the parliaments that ever sat, all the kings that ever reigned, put together, have not affected the life of man on this earth as much as that one solitary life. If there was no resurrection, I can't see how this life could be the most influential life of all time. Jesus rose from the dead. I don't have enough faith to believe anything else. Thank you.
All right. I'll just plug this thing in. See if it works. There we go. That's my plane ticket again. Okay. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Contact or read the book by Carl Sagan. It's an incredibly interesting book. And in that book, at one point, there's a priest and there's a scientist. And the priest challenges the scientist in the movie played by Jodie Foster. And she asks him, the priest, how do you know all of this is true? How do you know that this and that is true? And then he said, well, I believe it. I think it's what I believe in. And she says, I cannot believe anything that I don't know for a fact, for a reason. And then at one point he asked her, did you love your father? And then she said, yes, I did. And then he says, prove it. And I think that's a wonderful story because it tells us that, of course, I need to believe. I need to believe in something. There is something in this life that is grander than me. And that is the love for my kids. That's the world around me. That's the people I love, the real humans around me. I do not need to prove that love. I cannot explain that love. I can explain it that it's something that happens in the molecules of my head, but that has no musicality for me. I know that it's the fact. I don't want to lie to myself, but in my daily life, I don't think too much about that. That is the illusion I can live with, because it's an illusion that has something very concrete out in this reality that it is concerned with. This is my religion. There's absolutely no doubt about that, because I know that he is real. Today, after I'm done with this, I will go home to him, and I know that he's there. The things that you apparently love, a creature in the sky that you apparently love, you cannot go back to him now. You have to wait to the day that you're dead. And that's the only place where you will actually know for certain if he was there or if you've all been cheated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. You may not kiss the bride, sorry, you may shake each other's hands. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much for your good concentration. Thank you. Thank you to this wonderful audience. Thank you for your enormous concentration. 2.5 hours. I'm really impressed. Although some of you had God on your side, and that's probably why you were able to concentrate. I'll even applaud the atheist because you stayed on. So thank you very much. I know more critical questions could have been asked, but that's the nature of a debate. Thank you very much once again. I hope you had a brilliant evening. Goodbye. Thanks, Frank. Well done.
Thank you very much.